Hello crocheting friends, I'm so excited to share with you my beach cover-up crochet pattern. The stitch is absolutely beautiful and easy to do, and the construction is very, very simple. We're going to go through step by step how to make this beautiful beach cover-up. Hello, this is Jacqueline from Jack Knits, and welcome to my channel. We are going to be crocheting today this beautiful summer beach cover-up. The structure is fairly simple. It's going to be just done in a couple pieces. We're going to create this nice neckline, some sleeves, a very simple stitch. So I'm going to first show you how to do this beautiful stitch. It's called the rope stitch. It's a nice lacy stitch for a cover-up, and then we'll talk about how we're going to structure it and seam it up at the end. Let's talk a little bit about the structure of this garment. You can see this is the front view of the cover-up, and this is it laying flat. We are going to start at the hemline of the front panel. We're going to work ourselves up to this neckline here, complete one shoulder, then complete the other side, connect the two, and then go back down the back. And then we're going to, at the end, when we got all of this panel complete, we will pick up stitches on the side and work this way out for the sleeves. Then when we're done, we're just going to be seaming under the sleeves and down the side. So very simple structure. Let's get started. So we're going to be using a 100% cotton yarn for this. I'm using the Hobby Lobby I Love This Cotton brand, and we're using a 6mm crochet hook. Now for this pattern, you can make this any size you want. You can just adjust how many stitches you do for the foundation chain, how long you make it, how wide, etc. I'm going to show you what size I made it, but you can make the adjustments as you go. We are going to do a foundation chain of 75 chains. Now that's the width that I wanted for the base of my hem. Now if you needed to be a little bit wider or a little bit narrower, just add or subtract by multiples of 3. Okay, so we are going to start with a slip knot. And let's crochet 75 chains for my foundation. All right, 75 chains are completed. And now we're going to start with our very first row. And that first row is going to be a setup row. It's just the one that we're going to do before we do the next row, which is the repeat row, which you will repeat for the duration of the project. So this very first setup row, what we're going to do is skip this very first chain from our hook, and in this next chain we're going to do what's called a stacked single crochet. And here's how to do that. We're going to do a single crochet in that second chain from the hook. Then in this very left strand of yarn, we're going to insert our hook in there again and do another single crochet. So that's called a stacked single crochet, and it's going to represent our first double crochet of this row. Now this is in place of what you often see is doing like a chain 3 to start your work on the sides. This is a little bit of a neater option for that. It gives it a nicer, straighter edge. So that's why I use this stacked single for this project. Okay, so after our stacked single crochet, we are going to skip the next stitch. So this next chain we're going to skip. And in the next chain following, we will do 1 double crochet. So wrap our yarn around our hook, insert our hook into that stitch, bring the yarn through, yarn over, bring through 2, yarn over, bring through 2. Now we will do a chain 1. And in the very next stitch, we will do another double crochet. So yarn over, insert, bring the yarn through, yarn over, bring through 2, yarn over, bring through 2. Okay, so now we're going to repeat that little sequence to the end of this row where we skip the next stitch. In the following stitch, we'll do a double crochet, then a chain 1, and another crochet, a double crochet in the next stitch. Skip the next stitch, double crochet in the next. Chain 1, another double crochet in the next stitch. Okay, so that's the repeat we're going to do all the way to the end of this row. I will meet you at the end of the row and we'll talk about how to finish the row, turn it, and start the repeat row. All right, I'm almost done with this setup row. I'm going to complete my last little sequence here. I'm skipping one stitch and then doing a double crochet in the next stitch. Chain one, another double crochet in the next stitch after that. Then we're going to skip one chain, and in the very last chain, we are going to do a double crochet. All right, now we can turn our work and start the repeat row, which will be the same, the row that you're going to repeat again and again for the duration of our pattern. Now at this point, you should have 74 stitches for your row, just one less than the number that we chained initially. So that's the stitch count that you're going to want to maintain for the duration of this front panel. If you don't have 74, you might want to just check to make sure that you did the stitching correctly on that setup row. Okay, let's do this repeat row. We're going to start this repeat row again with that stacked single, so no need to do any chain stitches when we turn, but in that very first stitch of the next row, we will do a single crochet. And then in that very first strand on the very left, we're going to insert our hook again and do another single crochet for our stacked single. All right, then we're going to skip this first little gap, but in this next gap, you notice that this is this chain one gap. This is this area in the row below where we did a chain one between the two double crochets. This is the gap that we're going to be working in for the duration of this project. We are going to do what I call the rope stitch in this chain one gap below. So the rope stitch consists of one double crochet in that gap, then a chain one, and then another double crochet in that same gap. And that's a little rope stitch in that chain one gap. Now we're going to continue to do that in each one of these chain one gaps all the way to the end of this row. So we're going to skip this first gap, and this is that next chain one gap we're going to work in with a double crochet, a chain one, and another double crochet in that same gap. Skip this next space. Here's that chain one gap again. Let's do our rope stitch in there, double crochet, chain one, and another double crochet in that same space. Skip the next gap and let's do that rope stitch in the following gap. All right, let's continue that sequence all the way to the end of this row, doing that rope stitch in each one of these chain one gaps all the way to the very end. I'll meet you at the end and we'll talk about turning our work again. Okay, we're nearing the end of the row again. We're going to be doing our rope stitch in this last chain one space. So a double crochet, chain one, a double crochet, and then we're skipping this last little gap, and here's our stack single that we did initially. We're going to do our last stitch right in this very top stitch of that single crochet, and we're doing a double crochet right in there. So right in that top stitch, right in that single crochet, and that will create this nice clean edge, straight edge, and that will be what we will end every row with a double crochet in that stack single that we did at the start of every row. So now we can turn our work again, and now we're just going to continue the same pattern again and again for the entire front panel here, where we start with that stacked single, then we're going to do that rope stitch in that chain one space, skip a gap, do it in each chain one space all the way to the end. Okay, so we're just going to continue working that all the way up here on our front panel till we get to about a couple inches below the very top of your shoulder, wherever you want your neckline to begin. So you can make this as long as you want. If you want it kind of like a dress size, you know, just hold it up to yourself. And when you get to that point, we will begin to do that that shoulder seam here. So let me keep working ahead. I will do this all the way up to this point here. Then we'll jump back together and work on doing this shoulder section. See you in a little bit. All right, well, this is how far I've gotten on my front panel. It's just one big rectangle. I'm just kind of holding it up to myself a couple inches below the top of my shoulder here and making sure that it's long enough. So this is coming to about my mid-thigh, so I think that's a good length for my beach cover-up. And then if you see, I also added a couple stitch markers here at the top to determine how wide I want my shoulder panel to be from the edge. So that will help us when we do this next row on these shoulder panels when to stop doing our stitches from the end. So we'll continue with our shoulder panel and I'll show you how to do that edge. All right, I've completed this front panel as shown, and now we're at this point where I'm at this level here, and I'm going to just now do some stitching back and forth on this section here on the side for the shoulder panel. So as I mentioned, I added some stitch markers equal distance from the edge for each of the shoulder panels. I put my stitch markers, 9 of my little rope stitches in from the edge, and I made sure I marked it at the same spot on the other side. So our shoulder panels are the equal width. So now we're going to be stitching from this edge only to the stitch marker and then back and forth. And we're going to do that only for about 6 inches, and that will comprise of our shoulder panel. Then we'll do the other side, okay? So let's start stitching again. I ended on this side with my last row. And now we're going to do the same stitch pattern, but just stop at that stitch marker. So let's start again with that stacked signal that we do on every row. And then we're doing that rope stitch in those chain 1 spaces all the way to that stitch marker. And that's going to be 9 rope stitches we're going to complete for each shoulder panel. All right, here's my last chain 1 gap before my stitch marker. So I'll do 1 more rope stitch in there. Now I put my stitch marker in that gap that we normally skip when we're doing our rope stitches across the row, but I'm going to put my last double crochet in that next gap here where my stitch marker is. So 1 double crochet right in that gap that we normally don't stitch in, but we are for the end of this row, and that's going to complete the row for our shoulder panel. So now we can turn our work, and we'll go just again back and forth along this shoulder panel, just working the same stitch, and we're going to do this for about 6 inches, or however you can make it shorter or longer depending on how wide of a neckline you want. So let's just do the same row again where we start with that stack single, excuse me, and we'll go into this first chain 1 space right here. And continue those rope stitches in each one of the chain 1 spaces, just like our regular pattern that we've been doing all along. All right, here's my last rope stitch for this row. And again, we'll end with that double crochet in that stacked signal stitch on the end. All right, we'll turn our work again, and we'll just continue now going back and forth for this section of my shoulder panel where we stopped here at the stitch marker. Then we're going to do the exact same thing on the other shoulder panel where our stitch marker is. So I'll meet back with you, and when I'm done with my shoulder panel, it's going to be about 6 inches. I'll make sure I keep track of how many rows I've done so our shoulder panel on the other side is the same length. All right, here is where we are at this point. We have completed the shoulder panels, and now we're at this point in our little model here where we have, since we've completed these shoulder panels, now we need to do a row where we stitch along the shoulder panel, then connect these two shoulder panels with a series of chain stitches so we can continue to go back and forth to do the back panel. So here's where we have to instill a little math. We started out with 74 stitches. We want to end up again with 74 stitches. So to determine how many chain stitches we need to do to connect these, instead of trying to count these, which you often kind of miss some of them on the end, we're going to do a little math. We know that we have our 9 rope stitches here for each panel. Each rope stitch consists of 3 stitches. And then we had a stitch on the end and the beginning of each shoulder panel row. So that's 2 extra stitches. So we have 9 rope stitches times 3, that's 27, plus 2 on the end, that's 29 stitches. So we have 29 stitches on both shoulder panels. So that's a total of 58 stitches. Now to get up to 74, we need to do 16 stitches in between our shoulder panels, and then we'll come up with 74 stitches again. Sorry about the math, but it's sometimes easier to do math to be more consistent than just trying to count. So that's what we're going to do a row here across, 16 chain stitches, continue our row here, and then we're going to do kind of a special row where we have to kind of do that little setup stitches here in the chain stitches before we can continue on. So let's get started. All right, we're going to start our row here just like any other time where we do that stacked single here. And do our rope stitches for each of these 9 rope gaps to the end of this shoulder panel. All right, this is our last rope stitch for this shoulder panel, and we are going to do a double crochet in this end stacked single that we have here. So just like before. Okay, so now we've completed this shoulder panel. Now we're going to do our 16 chain stitches to connect these 2 shoulder panels. So fairly loosely, don't do them too tightly, but let's do 16 chains. All right, 16 chains completed. Now we're going to connect that with this side of the shoulder panel by doing a double crochet in that end stitch, that stacked single that we did when we were turning our rows. Okay, so that connects the panels. Now we will continue with our rope stitches in each of these chain 1 gaps to the end of the row. And we will end with a double crochet in this last stitch here. This is where we joined our new working yarn, so it's a little loosey stitch there, but we're going to just do a last double crochet on that end stitch. All right, now let's turn our work. Now we're going to continue along in our pattern here up until these chain stitches, and then we're going to do something very similar to our setup round where we did that double crochet, a chain, and then a double crochet in the next stitch across our chains. It's going to look very similar to that setup row. So let's get across this first panel here by doing our stacked single. All right, here's our last chain 1 gap. All right, now we're going to start these stitches along our chain here by skipping the first 2 stitches. So this stitch and then this first chain stitch. And we're going to do a double crochet in this next stitch after those two that we skipped. So double crochet, then we will chain one, and we will do another double crochet in the next stitch. Then we will skip one chain and do a double crochet in the next. Chain one and a double crochet in the next stitch. So this is just like that setup row that we did. Skip one, double crochet, chain one, and double crochet in the next. All right, so that has completed our little setup row on these chain stitches that connected our panels. Now we'll continue to do those rope stitches just like our normal row that we've been doing into these chain one spaces all the way to the end. All right, let's end this row with one double crochet. And let's turn our work again. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go through this row, and then we're going to continue with this same pattern for our back panel. But let me just show you how we're going to, continue across these stitches here that connect those panels. We'll start our row as always with the stacked. And continue with these rope stitches just like always. Now when you get to our little section here where we're connecting the panels, you're just going to continue to look for that chain one gap, that next chain one gap, which is right here, and just continue those rope stitches in those chain one gaps, just like we did for that first row of our project, our first repeat row. Here's the next chain one gap. Skipping that gap, next one. Skip a gap, next chain one gap. Skip, stitch in here. Skip, stitch. And then you'll get to the regular stitches that we did along the panel here and those chain one gaps. No need to do anything on those, in the edges anymore. We're now just continuing that same pattern across our entire row. Okay, so you're just going to continue finishing this row, and then you're just going to go back and forth to do the entire back panel. And of course, you're going to want your back panel to equal your front panel. So just count how many stitches you did, or measure how long you did your front panel before you broke for the shoulder panels, and do that for the back panel. Once we've got that completed, we'll work on the sleeves. So I'll see you when I'm finished with the back. All right, I have completed the back portion of my cover up. So basically what we have is one big long rectangle with a hole in the middle. So now you can go ahead and try it on at this point, so we can determine where we're going to want to put the sleeve. So you're just going to want to just kind of give it a ballpark area. You can make the sleeves, really wide if you want, or a little bit more narrower, and just indicate kind of with your finger where you want that sleeve to be. And then we're going to take a stitch marker and just mark on one side where that edge of the sleeve works well for your body type there. And then when we lay it flat, we're going to be able to indicate equal distance from the top of the shoulder to the other side to place our stitch marker on there, and then do the exact same thing, counting the number of rows we want to place the edge of our sleeve on the other side. So let's lay it flat and work on picking up the stitches and doing the sleeves for both sides. All right, now that I have had one of the stitch markers in place where I wanted my sleeve to go, I can lay it flat down on my table here and make sure that my neckline is together front and back, and then I can just make sure that I put a stitch marker on the exact opposite end of my sleeve, the other side, and that it lines up nicely so it's the same distance from the top of the shoulder down to the underarm of the sleeve. And if you want to count your rows to make sure that that feels about right, I think I had 14 rows here on each side. And then you would just do the exact same thing on this side. Count how many rows from the top and make sure that your stitch markers are lined up here under the arm, so we'll have each sleeve be the same width. Okay, then we're going to be ready to start to pick up stitches along this area here and work on our sleeves. So to look at our model again here, we are going to be working on the sleeves here, picking up these stitches and working outward from the top of the shoulder here for our sleeves. So let's look at how to pick up these stitches along the outside edge. All right, now we are ready to pick up our stitches between our two stitch markers here to complete our sleeve. So let's start on this side, and we will start with a new working yarn. We will insert our hook right where our stitch marker is, bring a loop through, and then to secure it, just do one chain, maybe with both the legs or both of the tails of the yarn, just to make it a little secure. And then we'll just work with our working yarn. And in this very first gap, we're going to be picking up stitches with our rope stitches like we did for the rest of the project in these large gaps here at the end of the row. So we're going to, in that very first gap at the end of this row, we will do a rope stitch, which is that double crochet, chain, and another double crochet in that same spot. Okay, now we're going to actually skip these little gaps that are at the end of this next row and go into the gap of the following row. So we're going to be picking up stitches every other row with our rope stitches in those gaps at the end of the row. Skip this next gaps and go into the following one in the end of that following row. Skip this row into the next row. And we will do this all the way to our next stitch marker that we have in place, indicating the end of the sleeve. And then we'll turn our work and do the second row. Okay, I've got one more rope stitch to do at the very end where I'm reaching my marker. And now we will end this row with a double crochet right where our marker is. So just right in that last little stitch here, we will do a double crochet, and we're ready to now turn our work. So now we've picked up these stitches all the way across the sleeve, and we'll continue to work this way for our sleeve. So let's turn our work. So now in this very first chain one space, we will do that rope stitch. And we will continue to do those rope stitches in each one of these chain one spaces across. All right, this is my last rope stitch. Now I'm going to put a double crochet in my very last stitch here, which was that first stacked single that we did to start this row. And now we can turn our work again and work the other way, doing our rope stitches just like our regular pattern, and we will continue that for the desired length of your sleeve, and you can make that as long as you'd like. Just kind of, I think I made mine for about 5 or 6 inches just down a ways from my sleeve. Then you're going to go to the other side to the sleeve and do the exact same thing. Pick up those stitches between those markers at the edge of every other row and continue to do the rope stitch pattern for the exact length of your sleeve that you did for this first one. So let me work ahead. I'll complete both of these sleeves and then we'll jump back, and all that will be left will be to seam underneath the sleeves and down the sides, and then our project will be complete. All right, I have finished crocheting the sleeves on both sides of my cover up. I made sure that I did them the exact same length, and now we are ready to just finish our project up by doing the seaming. So we're just going to seam now underneath the arms and down the sides. So let's get that started together here. Now you can choose to do really any type of crochet seaming that you'd like, whatever is easiest for you or the most comfortable for you to use. I'm going to use the mattress stitch to do my seaming today, and this is how that mattress stitch works. All right, let's place our wrong side of our fabric together here, and when we do the mattress stitch, we're always going to be inserting our needle from the wrong side of the fabric to the right side every time we do a stitch. So we're going to start by connecting our corners here by inserting our needle from the wrong side to the right side into that corner stitch and pulling the yarn through. Then we're going to go into the other side from the wrong side to the right side and pull it through the corresponding stitch directly across from the one that you started. Now we're going to go back to this side and go from the wrong side to the right side again. So we'll go from the wrong side, just pick the stitch next to it to the right side, and again from the wrong side to the right side with the corresponding stitch across the way. Wrong side to the right over here, and again over here. So that's really the stitch. We're going to do that all the way down, and after you do stitch for a couple inches, you can pull this yarn a little tighter, and that's going to kind of cinch up the seam really nice and smooth, and you're going to end up with a really nice flat surface, flat seam on both sides of your fabric. Okay, so that is the mattress stitch. We're going to go all the way down the underarm and then down the sides of the fabric as well. And then we will have completed our project once you do that on both sides. All right, we are done with our beautiful summer cover-up. It's a perfect, easy project for this summer. I hope you give it a try. If you like this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and check out my channel for all sorts of wonderful videos on tips and techniques on crochet and knitting. Thanks for watching, everybody. Happy crocheting!